All right, welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon for us on the West River side of the state. I will start by sharing my screen. Can you guys all see my screen right now?
Yes,
Thumbs up?
I can see it.
Wonderful. All right, well, thank you for the introduction, Julie. So my name is Elisabetta Giomo-James. I'm a Thai learning specialist, and I also serve on the Statewide Family Engagement Center. It's good to see some of my team members on the call today. I live in Flanders right now, and I am originally from Italy. I been living here since 2008. I did all my studies in social work and my work experiences here in the United States. I worked first as a case manager in outpatient mental health care, and then I was very fortunate to enter the school system here in Flanders as the Native American Education Coordinator before joining Thai last year. It's an honor to be here, and also just spending this time together talking about such an important topic today. Oops, sorry. Here's my contact information. I will be sharing my slides later on in the session resources, so you'll be able to have access to this if you have any further questions at a later time. You can see my greeting in 3 different languages. I am originally from Italy, and like I said, now I've been living here since 2008, and I'm also connected to the Dakota and Lakota community, so I'm very grateful and honored for that. So today's objectives include trying to define what self-care is. Sometimes that is such an elusive kind of term, and also identifying self-care practices that are actionable while engaging in self-reflection, which is very critical on the self-care journey, and hopefully helping you renew commitment to self-care. Group norms during our time is to try to stay open and present while participating without judgment, especially towards ourselves, and also respecting any type of confidentiality because of the nature of the webinar. Our names are up there and sharing in the chat, and I'm hoping to make it as interactive as possible. Just a note on self-care during this time. I just wanted to take a moment just to acknowledge all of those out there that have been impacted by COVID-19, including all of us on the call today, but especially those that have been impacted firsthand, whether they contracted the virus or their loved ones contracted the virus, or those first responders, healthcare professionals, frontlines employees at the grocery store. So just wanted to take a moment to send our energy and our thoughts to them, and also recognize all of you and what you are going through during this time. I hope that this time together and this presentation will help you feel supported and find some validation and encouragement on your journey as you try to navigate the difficult times that we're all finding ourselves in. I personally am trying to focus on reprioritizing my life on my own self-care journey, and in doing so, I feel that I'm honoring those that have been impacted more significantly due to COVID by really trying to make the most out of this time, and so really honoring self-care for me more as a collective commitment as well. So why self-care? These are just some responses that in the past I was able to receive at a different presentation. And as you can see, the emerging theme is really that of service. As you can see, taking care of ourselves is really important because we want to be able to take care of others, or really be able to be effective with our students, specifically in your role as an educator. But I would also like to bring it to the next level and really have us thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Really, why are we drawn to self-care? We're drawn to self-care because it is only in our human nature to strive for self-actualization, to really be able to tap into our fullest potential. And how timely with Jason Berg today opening a keynote for our conference. If you were able to hear his speech, or maybe you'll go and listen to his recording later on, he brought up the importance of well-being and joy, and the fact that we now live in a society and that is really people and purpose oriented. So I felt that was so timely with our conversation this afternoon. So really, when we look at why we're drawn to self-care, it's really because it's our nature, it's our calling to be able to continue to grow and be able to tap into those gifts that are unique to each and one of us. And with that, I also found this very helpful quote by Maslow, and says, growth must be chosen again and again, and fear must be overcome again and again. And that is, again, very timely in the times that we are faced, because the fear of the virus is very much real. So why the science of self-care? Why did I title our presentation The Science, the Art and Science of Self-Care? Let's take a look at why looking at the science can help us on our self-care journey. So first of all, let's look at this model of the brain. You can see from the picture, this is a model of the brain that is divided into three main parts. And actually, it reflects how our brain evolved from prehistoric times to today. At the very bottom in the orange, we have the reptilian brain. And that is the part of our brain that is responsible to regulate our levels of alertness, our bodily functions, such as heart rate and breathing. And it is always, always on. And it's automatic. Then up in the green right above the reptilian brain, we see the limbic system. In the limbic system, we have important parts such as the hippocampus and the amygdala. And this part of the brain is responsible with emotions, regulating emotions, forming attachments or relationships, and also activating and managing the body's stress response, the fight, flight, and freeze response, which is really responsible for keeping us alive and survive in the world. And then last in our evolution of our brain, the neocortex developed, and it's right up front, right here, and it wraps around these other parts that we just covered. And this part of the brain is really responsible for logic, planning, decision-making, and even important for our self-awareness and ability to have empathy. And another way to look at this model is what Dr. Daniel Siegel, a clinical professor at UCLA School of Medicine in California, talks about as the downstairs and upstairs brain. The downstairs brain encompasses our reptilian and limbic system, and our upstairs brain is the neocortex. So for us to really be at our best, we need to be able to have integration within these parts. However, when we are having a fear response or when we are highly stressed out, we tend to operate from a downstairs brain. So again, remember, the reptilian brain and the limbic system are mostly our automatic bodily functions and our emotions. So when we are operating just from a downstairs brain, We are not operating from a place of self-awareness, empathy, and in a logical way. So next, in our journey of looking at science, we're looking at what is stress then. Stress is the body's reaction to situations or stimuli perceived as a threat. It activates our fight, flight, freeze response, which is really our, which again, as I mentioned a little bit ago, is a response that we have evolved to have to survive. So while at the beginning of times it was very adaptive because it helped our humans to survive and thrive, now it can be, in our modern times, it can become maladaptive because we have a lot of different factors such as emotional and relational threats that we might misinterpret and trigger our stress response. So another model that we can use to engage in our self-care journey, to become more self-aware and develop some coping skills, is looking at stress and the body stress response under this perspective of window of stress tolerance. And this perspective actually was developed by Heather Forbes, who is a specialist and in trauma-informed practices. So the blue part that you see in this model is really our window of stress tolerance, is the amount of stimuli, stress, and other things in our environment that we can tolerate before we become dysregulated. And dysregulated really just simply means when our stress response, the fight, flight, and freeze response kicks in. And I failed to mention earlier, so I would like to point it out right now, how the fight, flight, and freeze response look like. A fight response, for example, might be if I'm highly stressed and I'm trying to get work done, and one of my boys, my 11-year-old, tries to get help for me in math, and I'm really trying to get something done, I might, snap back and maybe raise my voice. That would be me operating from a fight response. A freeze response might be when I really feel like I have no emotions, no feelings, and I feel stuck and immobilized by fear. A freeze or a flight response would be when I really literally feel like I need to stop and get out of the situation, and I might want to go and take a drive. But anyway, so with the window of stress tolerance can help us start thinking about what kind of things trigger me and start shutting my window of stress tolerance, so then I am more apt to become dysregulated and operate from a place of fight, flight, or freeze. So again, the relevance to self-care becomes really being able to start thinking about then what gets in the way. Because I think that a lot of the times we hear about how self-care is important, but we also hear about who has time for self-care. So really, we need to start thinking about what is that get in the way? What causes us maybe to operate from the downstairs brain that we just covered? What causes to decrease our window of stress tolerance, our ability to operate from a place of wellness? When we are within our window of stress tolerance, we're able to operate from that integrated brain perspective where the downstairs and upstairs brain are connected and are working together for our wellness. So we have arrived at our place to maybe interact, and so I'll start paying attention to the chat. I'd like you to just take a moment to jot down in the chat, or if you feel more comfortable in a private note, what gets in the way of your self-care? What might be some barriers for you, or what are some triggers that cause you to not being able to take care of yourself? Wow, it's going so fast, it's really tough to keep up with it. But I see very good points.
Elizabeth,
So,
it's hard for me to keep up with it too, but
yes,
it looks like there is kind of a theme around managing work and family. Um,
absolutely.
Yep, not feeling like you're doing enough for everyone. I'll kind of let you look there and help summarize if I can, but they're pretty fast and furious, which is awesome.
They are. Thank you. Thank you all for your contributions. I really appreciate your engagement and participation. I'm hoping that this presentation will help address some of these barriers and triggers. So, and I see I have a raised hand. We'll get to questions here shortly. And you know what? I'm just going to take questions right now because I realize I covered quite a bit. Are there any questions at this time?
Elisabetta, would you like me to unmute Mike to ask a question or have him put that in the
Sure.
chat?
He
We have a large
absolutely.
group, but Mike, I'll go ahead and unmute you if you want to ask a question.
I'm sorry, I didn't know what that meant. So but while I have you, I teach at the Flandreau Indian School. So I'm right next door to you.
And actually, Mike, can I say, I think I recall you, you're my son's soccer coach.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Well, there we go.
Awesome. I love this.
This is amazing.
Yes.
By the way,
Go for it, Mike.
This is a lot of what we try to do with our kids. As you know, we have kids that come from all over the country, and the first thing we need to do is make sure they're comfortable in our classrooms, not only with us but with themselves, so they can be ready to learn. And I think that's the first thing you got to do. They're not going to be reaching out to you and do some things that's going to push their limits unless they're comfortable. And I mean comfortable mentally, emotionally, and physically. You know, some of these kids are so hungry they can't even think, and so
Right.
that's an issue.
Mike, you bring up such a good point. Julie, can I comment?
Yes, please. I'm going to go ahead and just mute Mike so that later we don't have all that coming back in, but feel free to raise your hand again if you have a question, or if others have questions, they can also raise their hands or put that in the chat. So
I think Mike brought up a great point, and I did not plan on covering it in this presentation, but as I was preparing this PowerPoint, I was also thinking about how self-care really is a component of a social-emotional learning type of model by Castle, right? Hopefully I'm saying it correctly. But also what our keynote this morning talked about. I jotted down a note, and he said, we need to experience well-being and joy if we're wanting to teach that and promote that in our classroom. So I think that's why this conversation is very important. Are there any other questions or comments this time?
I'm not seeing any in the chat right away, Elisabetta, but I can sure alert you if we get something.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, everybody. So just a quick note here. I'm going to check on time here. Perfect. So when we talk about self-care, we also want to think about where we might be headed if we do not have a plan and we don't engage in that journey. And that would be burnout and secondary trauma, which are very real experiences, especially for helping professionals, which include you guys, you teachers and educators. So it's important to look at these experiences and problems, real experiences and problems, in order to prevent them by knowing the signs, and especially important to remain socially connected. And this is so critical during these times. So definitions to just kind of try to distinguish them. Burnout is an overall state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion caused by long-term involvement in emotionally demanding situations. And we know that teaching is exactly that, a very emotionally demanding situation every day. You have so much going on all at once. While secondary traumatic stress is a state of stress resulting from internalizing somebody else's trauma experience, so knowing about it, and as well as stress that comes from the experience of wanting to help, or actually helping that person that experienced the trauma. So some warning signs, and please note this is not an all-inclusive list. Burnout is not being able to cope anymore and having this overall exhaustion that is also resulting in some physical symptoms. Depersonalization, so kind of, I describe that in easy terms as far as feelings of being jaded, and also feelings of failure or lack of personal accomplishment, that your teaching is not impactful and it's not worth it anymore. Secondary traumatic stress, on the other hand, is a lot of the same things, but especially the physical symptoms increase. Also, symptoms mimic PTSD, actually. There's kind of a way of pushing self-isolation, worrying excessively about potential dangers, increased irritability, and an effort, there's an actual effort to avoid thinking about the troubling memory from what was disclosed, or what you know somebody is experiencing that is traumatic. And with that, intrusion of images, thoughts, words related to what was heard. So very important, again, I don't go too much deep into this, but please do get help. Because again, stress and burnout and secondary traumatic stress are real experiences with real symptoms and consequences. Take action and prevention on your well-being. Stay connected, again, before things get worse, but also stay connected when you need the help. Reach out. Know your community resources. Call in 211 is always very helpful to find quickly what is in your community. Connect to professional help, absolutely, if difficulties persist. So I love this quote by Jen Alexander, another trauma-informed leader in the field. Self-care is like putting on sunscreen to prevent a sunburn. And I would even push it forward to use the metaphor and say prevent skin cancer, because again, if we don't practice self-care, it really will have serious consequences. So with that, this was the part where I had questions scheduled. Do we have any other questions at this time, or should I move forward?
Elisabetta, I'm not seeing real specific questions in the chat. Some people have made some very thoughtful comments, but they're not necessarily posed as questions. If someone has a question they'd like to ask Elisabetta, you're welcome to raise your hand and I can unmute you, or feel free to add things in the chat. I guess we do have one here from Carla. It says, how do teachers create healthy boundaries with families who are feeling the stress of distance learning in order to prioritize their own self-care without having families feel like teachers are not doing their job?
Such a valid question. I think that with that, it's important to set boundaries, also to role model good self-care. But I think that when you establish a good relationship with your students, the families will know because you would have shown them your availability during your hours. But I think it's very important for them to know, these are my hours of operations. This is when you can reach out to me. And then, of course, being able to follow up on that. If a family maybe sends you an email after 5 o'clock, if that's the time that you're going to unplug from work and start focusing on your own family and your own personal priorities, being able to, in a timely manner, follow up on that. But I think in my personal experience, because for Thai, I'm also a teacher for Black Hills Online Learning Community. And so I have a lot of, I have 50 families I work with. And that's been my experience, that as long as I show my responsiveness to their needs, and ability to help them in a timely manner, I am not burning that relationship, and I'm still supporting those families effectively. Any other questions? I hope that was helpful, Carla. I do see a private question. What are your thoughts about teachers preparing to deal with trauma-informed classrooms and teachers dealing with their own history? I would need a clarification on that. Gloriana, would you mind asking that question by unmuting yourself?
Elisabetta, I think I have to unmute her, but I would have to scroll through all 400 people to find her unless she can raise her hand, at which case she jumps to the top and then I can do that.
Okay, I just sent her a private message as well.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. I see another question. What would you suggest for teachers' children? They are having to step back and wait on mom and dad. Absolutely. So that is tough as well because I'm working also from home and have 2 children. So that's been a really tough balance for me also. I think just, again, having that relationship with your kids, but also trying to have a schedule. What I personally try to do, I try to have a lot of breaks within my own personal schedule. So I have some good focused time where I can be productive, but then I also have, for example, I have mindfulness breaks with my kids. I have some movement, but also having grace and patience with myself because it's not going to always be perfect as I just described. Some days we're able to follow the schedule and I'm able to have those breaks and build those relationships with my kids or continue to build them. And some days when I don't get to them, I'm seeing my kids understanding what is going on. So I hope that was helpful, Abby.
Elisabetta, I'm seeing a question here from Carla Rupp or Roop. It says, when families get into their own fight or flight responses and are not aware enough to know this, is there a strategy that you recommend?
Sure. Well, I think first of all, I mean, when we are in that fight flight response, and I don't think I mentioned this, but we respond within a 15-second kind of thing. Life happens within 15 seconds. So it's really hard to, control that unless you do that beforehand. So what I would recommend is maybe having some learning around this as a family. I try to do that also in my family as far as teaching about the downstairs and upstairs brain. A great tool that I recommend is the hand brain model by Daniel Siegel, and I can make sure that's in my resources. That's a great strategy to teach to children. And I know that in my own journey with my own kids, my kids are able to start calling me out when they're seeing that my window is decreasing. And so that's been a great way for me to kind of engage my prefrontal cortex so that I can keep my brain integrated and not become dysregulated and go into a fight-flight response. I hope that makes sense. But definitely having a culture within your family of self-care and having coping skills together as a family.
Elisabetta, I just unmuted Gloria so that she could ask her question. I see Mike is also unmuted. So Mike, if we'll let Gloria answer her question, but just know your audio. Okay, you've muted yourself. So Gloria, you should be able to ask a question live to Elisabetta if you would like now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. My question has to do with Little Wound School on the Pine Ridge Reservation. We've really been working a lot on mindfulness and also on being a trauma-informed school. We've been doing this for 3 to 4 years, I'd say. And my question is, how can teachers or staff become receptive to their own trauma history? Because we've done the ACEs surveys, and so many of the teachers and staff have a significant number within ACEs. But how to address that so that they can be healthy themselves to work with our student population? Because as you're familiar, we're working with Native populations. We've got a lot of history and events that have impacted and have given us tremendous trauma that impacts learning, impacts enthusiasm about school, impacts the ability to even identify that we're struggling sometimes. So,
Thank you, Gloriana. So you're talking about basically, if I'm understanding your question correctly, how do we have these conversations and support our educators with trauma histories, correct? Right. So, and I don't know much about your school, but I think key is really establishing a culture of self-care to support educators in the first place, because if we're wanting trauma-informed practices, and we're really relying on educators and the system. So I would really focus on how can we build a system that supports and values self-care, whether that is building some actual supports, whether it is having some self-care challenges, or having a room within the staff lounge where it's a corner of self-care and mindfulness, stuff like that. Does that help? Thank you, Gloriana, but you bring up such a great point.
Yes, thanks for your question. Oh, sorry, Elisabetta, are you going to keep going? I was
just going to say I better keep going, yes. But I appreciate all the great questions and comments, and I'm so excited to be on the call with you today, and I would love to continue the conversation moving forward, absolutely.
I think we've got, if there's a last question or two, oh, yep, you're going to keep going. Okay, Elisabetta. Yeah.
I better. I just want to make sure we get through the presentation, but we'll have more time for questions.
I wasn't sure if your question slide was like the end and we were just continuing with questions, but it looks like you have more content, so I will be quiet while you share that with us.
I sure do, guys. I really want to get to maybe some self-care practices and strategies for you. So why the art of self-care? I feel strongly about this because, again, with thinking about the Maslow hierarchy of needs, that self-actualization is really our calling, and really creating the life of our dreams, our, moving closer to our purpose really entails being artists. And with that, with any art, if you're a musician or you're an artist, you need to practice. And you need to build that muscle, that skill. And so that's why I call it the art of self-care as well. So, well, we've done a lot of interaction, but so I'm not gonna do this, but feel free to share in your chat. The question is, how do you feel when you are at your best? And I pose this question because when you do this, you're able to start thinking about what is happening inside of myself and outside of myself that is really promoting my feeling and my best. And I got kind of this thinking around this way from Mary Ellen Copeland, who has done a lot of work around addictions and also depression. In her method or her model is called the WRAP, the Wellness Recovery Action Planning. So start thinking about, how do you feel when you're at your best, and what is happening? What are you thinking? What are you doing? Who is around? What kind of things are happening inside of you and outside of you that are really promoting you feeling at your best and being closer to your wellness? And again, the first and most important component of self-care is you. Only you can make self-care happen. So let's demystify a little bit what self-care means. According to I like this University at Buffalo School of Social Work definition because I think it's very practical and very real. Self-care refers to activities and practices that we can engage in on a regular basis to reduce stress and maintain and enhance our short and longer term health and well-being. As you notice, I bolded activities and practices because that's really what it all is, on a regular basis. That is key as well. A lot of times I hear about, well, I tried self-care, it didn't work. Well, it's a matter of staying engaged. Like I mentioned earlier, I have my schedule. It's not always perfect, but I'm trying to stick with it before saying I tried and I give up, it didn't work. Also, part of this definition, in order to be effective in our personal and professional lives and enhance our ability to make an impact, self-care is absolutely required. And then I bring this up because responsibility is also part of the social emotional learning piece for our students. But oftentimes we arrive at the need for self-care because we feel maybe a loss of, or a lack of power, or a lack of sense of control over things. And so I know personally on my journey and just studying about self-care and just conversing with other professionals in the field, really the biggest component is us taking responsibility for our wellness. And when we do that, we do take control over what we are able to change. And that's another conversation, thinking about what do we have control over. And with that comes great power. So key learning in the process, those supports are key. Brené Brown is another incredible leader in this field that I recommend. Any of her books are amazing. We do have some on the Thai Library Reads as well. She highlights the importance of the 3 C's: courage, compassion, and connection. So connection is key, and that's what I have up there for supports. Boundaries, being brave, having courage to set boundaries, which I know is so hard. That is one of the hardest things for me as well. Taking action, and with that, having reflection, ongoing reflection. What is working, what is not? Because self-care is not something set in stone and static. It changes, it is dynamic. And having acceptance, being able to let go, having patience and grace with ourselves. And that's really where the C for compassion that Brené Brown talks about really comes into play. So keep these things in mind. And again, this has been what has worked for me and what has emerged from my studies around self-care. So self-care, again, I keep mentioning it, it's a journey that starts with self-awareness and introspection. So these are good questions that you can use to start journaling and start thinking about this, that you can either continue your journey or start back your journey. So what am I making space for in my life? I love this, visually in my head. If you close your eyes and think about what literally are you making space for in your life? Is that what you want? What are you already doing that helps you feel at your best? I am sure all of you are already doing good things that are helpful. What are your non-negotiables? What needs to happen every day or every week? What needs to happen for you to feel your best? What are your core values? And I'll get back to this in one of my strategies that I use personally. What are my triggers and barriers? We kind of talked about that already. What other ideas have you been meaning to try, but you keep putting off because other people come first? What do you need to do more of? So let's dive straight into it. Practice 1, check in. How often do you check in on others? I can imagine I've seen lots of US teachers checking in on kids all the times or other colleagues. Make it a point to check in on yourself as well. This was a big skill that I had to learn in my 20s when I kept pushing myself to the limits. And sometimes I didn't even take time to check in. Do I need to drink some water? Do I need to use the restroom? Even those basic needs on the hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, start from the bottom. Are you meeting those needs? How are you doing in this moment? Where is your window at? How are you feeling? What are you feeling? What do you need in this moment? Something that Jen Alexander uses a lot, and Jen Alexander is that trauma-informed practitioner I was mentioning earlier. You can use this construct in your mind. I feel blank, I need blank. So start thinking about that and become aware so you can meet your needs. Practice 2, your compass. Your compass helps setting intention, guide your attention where you want to put your attention to, helps you invest the time and energy, and also establish boundaries. So something very simple, draw a circle, place activities that are important to you, and also names of people that are very supportive to you, that you know have your back. And now outside of the circle, place the things and names that you have to be very protective of your energy and time around. Again, this is an exercise to help you become aware and being able to set the intention so you can take meaningful action moving forward.
Elisabetta, I'm just reminding
Yes.
you we're at about the 10-minute, actually about an 8-minute countdown now.
Okay, I better.
We still have some time, but.
I better get going though. Practice 3, self-care wheel. I do have a free handout for this, but I combined the Olga Phoenix, this is her self-care wheel, with the Artist Way exercise. So basically, this is obviously an example, but you place a dot in each slice at the degree to which you're fulfilled in that area. So when you're closer to the outer rim, it means that you feel great fulfillment, while if you're closer to the inner circle, you're not feeling so great. So when you do this, again, it helps you to create a visual about what areas might be impoverished, what areas might I want to look at to increase my attention, to increase my wellness. So all of this, again, when I talked about those key elements, help you gain awareness so that you can take action. Goal setting, this is, again, using that, how I modified it to make sure I'm hitting each area and I'm trying to find some good balance. I listed 1 to 3 things in each area. So for example, for physical, it's very important to me to try to drink enough water, to have regular exercise. Personal, that's more about developing yourself so you're closer to your goals. So one of my goals is to be more creative, so I put something in there for that. So again, try to think about what do you need to do in each area to fill your cup, to really feel fulfilled in each of those areas. Toolbox. Write a list of 20 or more things you enjoy doing, and that helps you cope and maintain your wellness. And let me guess, maybe you haven't done some of those in a while because, again, you come second, right? At least that's been my experience. So when can you do 1 or more of these things? Can you set a date so you can try to make it happen? Can you set a date for this week? And also, this has been really helpful for me, finding small bits of time really count and make a difference. So again, kind of with that question that we covered earlier, even if it's maybe I'm not giving as much attention as I want to my kids, but I'm making small bits of time to have some quality, meaningful interactions throughout the day as I try to balance all my roles during this time. This one is by Brené Brown, Dig Deep by Getting, Deliberate, Inspired, and Going. Brené Brown has done a ton of research around wholehearted living, that's what she calls it. And she found that people that are living wholeheartedly when they are struggling. So this is really a great tool for when you're struggling emotionally. They get deliberate by setting an intention. They also, some of them mention prayer and meditation if that applies to you. And they get inspired by trying new action. And sometimes that might mean, like I have a friend who's also a teacher. Her way of getting inspired is going to Oprah and getting inspired to get back on track. And getting going, getting it done. So that's been a great tool that I've been using as much as I can. Anchoring. So these are my kids, Kurt, my 3-year-old, and my 11-year-old, KJ. This, again, is something that I use a lot when I'm stressed or crunched for time. I feel that I'm trying to be balanced, but there's just a lot of pressure going on. So I go back to my compass that I talked about earlier. One of my biggest values, my top one, is family and being able to connect with my children. So during times that are very demanding, as long as I have one thing, and that's my anchor, spending time with my children, and hopefully trying to combine the other areas of wellness. So if it's nice out, maybe we're going to go and take a quick bike ride. That has been really helping me to ground myself in my wellness so that I can stay in my integrated brain, downstairs and upstairs, working together for my wellness. So think about here, just because we don't have so much time, who or what is your anchor, and start using it. Self-care bingo. This is a great activity that you can do now to stay connected maybe with other colleagues or even within your family. If you have teenagers or your spouse, your partners, this is a great thing you can do. You can create your own self-care bingo. Stay connected by sharing when you're completing one of them. If you want to, you can include the reward type of deal, but otherwise just doing it to keep accountable and to kind of make it fun. Mindfulness, please come to my session later so we can dive deep into this, but key with mindfulness is really paying attention by setting the intention to do that, focusing on your breathing and having compassion for yourself. So not judging yourself during your mindfulness experience. But like I said, there's way more to talk about. So please come to my session later if you'd like to learn more. This is a great meditation for stress management. Like I said, it will be in the slides if you'd like to check it out. It's a 2-minute, I believe, meditation, so very helpful. A credit list. During these times, I find that it's so hard sometimes to stay positive. So even if it's a everyday thing or as needed, write down a list of positive things that you're doing today, right this minute, and that you deserve credit for. Perhaps start a journal. There is a ton of research that links gratitude with well-being. Gratitude is recurrent. Keep it on a post-it note in a visible spot, or use an app like the 5-minute journal app if you want to kind of create that habit. But wrapping it up, a lot of the stuff I talked about, you can create a self-care plan. This is from Jen Alexander. It is included in the resources. As you can see, you have your sunscreen plan for maintenance of your wellness, and Sign on Becoming Overwhelmed and my Get Out of the Sun plan. That's more of a crisis emergency type of plan. And also at the bottom, you can keep in mind your really key supporters and cheerleaders that you need in your